And South Carolina is sending shockwaves through the SEC.
Frederick plays it in at the buzzer. That's a win. Unbelievable. I don't believe it.
And now, live from Studio 54 of the Gamecock Pod Studios, here's the Cockfather himself, Keith Alsep.
All right, everybody, welcome into Gamecock Pod Live for March the 29th, episode number 1187. And let's jump right into it with our headlines and go ahead and hop in the Nana's Porch chat box. News and headlines also brought to you by Nana's Porch, which is a full-service catering company based out of the Charlotte, North Carolina area, whether it is banquets, corporate events, golf tournaments, weddings, whatever the special occasion may be. As I get closer to my microphone here, Nana's Porch can do it all. They were voted top 3 food trailers in the local newspaper poll, and their pimento cheese was voted the best product in the meat cheese category by the North Carolina Specialty Foods Association. So if you are planning a party, a get-together, a Final Four tailgate this weekend, or watch party, if you're not going to Dallas like I am, go to nanasporch.com. They can hook you up even all the way to the full hog or full pig barbecue. They got you covered at nanasporch.com. All right, news, notes, and headlines for today. We'll start with Gamecock baseball. They really cruised last night to a very easy 13-2 victory over the Citadel. There were over 6,300 people in attendance, and I was told the Gamecocks basically took over the park. Citadel got on the board first in the bottom of the first inning, up 1-0, but the Gamecocks added 4 runs in the third. Caleb Denny and Gavin Cassis added to the Gamecocks' nation-leading number of home runs, which is now 66 in the win. And it was Johnny Holstaff last night, as 7 different Gamecock pitchers pitched 1 complete inning in the 7-run or the 7-inning affair that was ended by the run rule. Zach Zadalis gets the win for the Gamecocks, striking out 2 Bulldogs in his 1 complete inning. Men's basketball. Lamont Paris on the board in the transfer portal today, picking up former Morehead State and Minnesota point guard who played at Dorman High School, Talon Cooper, who is 6'4". I really love this pickup because he is a pass-first point guard, which will allow Meechie Johnson to play more off the ball. He has the size to guard multiple positions, and he was 6th in the NCAA last year in assists per game, averaging 6.32 assists. He chose the Gamecocks over Arkansas, Kansas State, Virginia, LSU, Clemson, and others. So this was a nice first pickup for Lamont Paris, but I don't think he's finished. Okay, several more players making official visits to South Carolina earlier this week, including 6'8" Citadel forward Stephen Clark, He wrapped up his official visit with the Gamecocks yesterday. He was second team All-SoCon, averaged over 16 points and 6.5 rebounds, almost 3 assists per game and almost 2 blocks per game. So I really like him. The Gamecocks also hosted Dayton big man, 6'10" stretch forward Mustafa Amzil, a native of Finland. Shot almost 40% from 3 this past season. He really fits the bill of what Lamont Paris wants in a big. Somebody that can play inside, somebody that can protect the rim, but can also be a pick and pop guy and a guy that can stretch the defense. Memphis, Pittsburgh, and SMU are others to watch there. But watch this Finnish connection, okay? And Finnish, I mean by Finland, okay? The Gamecocks hosted 2 other prospects from Finland that are at a basketball academy in Finland. They are both members of the class of 2023. 6'4" guard Morris Ugasuk. Okay, he's also visited Oklahoma State and Duquesne. And then 6'9" forward Oku Federico, who is the younger brother of Fede Federico, the 7-foot center that the Gamecocks appeared to be in great shape for, and then he chose Pitt over the Gamecocks. He's also visited Duquesne and has offers from Pitt and Syracuse. So the Gamecocks are very active in the transfer portal. I would expect more visitors in possibly this weekend as the Gamecocks look to fill out their roster, or there could be, quite frankly, more commitments this weekend. All right, women's basketball signees, Tessa Johnson and Malaysia Fulwiley participated in the McDonald's All-America game, which I've not had a chance to watch yet. But the highlights floating around on social media of Fulwiley, I'm telling you guys, she is a 5'8" version of Steph Curry. She's coming off an injury which probably prevented Keenan from winning the state championship. They showed her knocking down, she shoots it from Caitlin Clark range with ease. Silky smooth ball handler. Look, it's an all-star game, folks. Nobody is playing defense in an all-star game, right? I think both teams scored over 100 points in this game. Tessa Johnson started for the West team. She was more of a facilitator. She's a 5'10" guard who is a top 25 prospect that was, I think, South Carolina's first commitment for the class of 23, maybe the second commitment. I can't really remember, but I know I was excited. She's coming off a huge senior season where she led her team to the 4A state championship in Minnesota. She scored 27 points in the state final victory, and this past season she averaged over 24 points per game. She's just a smooth operator. She can shoot from 3. She can get the mid-range, passes the ball, great court vision, just a great all-around player. I think her ceiling is very high. And quite frankly, I think she would probably be ranked higher if she had not had a horrific broken leg last year in her junior year. So maybe kind of a lot like Tiffany Mitchell here. 5'10", can handle it, could play point, can shoot it good enough to play on the wing. I really like this pickup. that you add her to 6'2" forward Sanaya Ja. Kind of a surprise she didn't make McDonald's All-American. And then Chloe Kitts, who is a top 5 prospect who most certainly would have been a McDonald's All-American. Of course, she chose to enroll mid-year and skip her senior season. And I think she could be a starter next year for the Gamecocks. So Notre Dame signee Hannah Hidalgo, who's a 5'6" point guard, and Judea Watkins, they were the co-MVPs of that game. Them along with, Michaela Johnson, whatever the girl going to LSU, Michaela Williams, who shot it about every time she touched it. Those were some of the standouts. All right, some Gamecock news and notes. This is the in case you missed it category. Shane Beamer announced yesterday that Jordan Strong has officially been granted his 6th year of eligibility. And so he will definitely be back with the team. Lil Turbo, Dante Miller, they're still working through that. They would definitely like to have him back with that lack of depth at running back for an additional year if they can get him. Several players met with the media. That just wrapped up a short time ago. Some of the highlights from that. Spencer Rattler spoke, I think, for the first time this spring, glowingly. He spoke about Dowell Loggins, called him D-Lo. I don't think we'll confuse him with J-Lo, but called him D-Lo, said it's kind of a partnership, doing a great job, very consistent, said he's the same guy off the field that he is on the field and in the film room, very genuine, doing a great job of streamlining the offense, simplifying things. Some of the players spoke glowingly about some of their teammates. Rattler mentioned Nick Gargiulo. No surprise there. He's probably going to be a starter either at center or at guard. He and Vershawn Lee are both doing a great job there. I would expect one of them will start at center and the other one will be one of your starting guards along with Ja'Kai Moore. So if I was handicapping it today, I would say the starting tackles will be at left tackle, Jalen Nichols, Tyshawn Wanamaker at right tackle, and then at guards, Gargiulo or Vershawn Lee and Ja'Kai Moore. Those guys will be your starting guards, and then whoever is not at guard between Vershawn Lee and Gargiulo will be the starting center. And I'm told Nick Gargiulo does not look like a newcomer. He looks like a guy that has been in South Carolina's program since Shane Beamer got there. So this was a really great pickup. Shane Beamer spoke glowingly yesterday about Marquis Anderson, and you've got a bunch of really good players like the Big Tree, Trevon Baugh, and let's see, who else we got? Oh, Jatavius Shivers, 6'7", 295. Those guys are coming in. You've already got Cam Pringle committed. Blake Franks will make his announcement Friday afternoon at 3:45. I will be in Dallas at the Final Four at that time. And on April the 14th, Josiah Thompson out of Dillon will make his announcement at 9 a.m. in the gymnasium. I'm expecting good news for the Gamecocks with both of those players. Now, Some of the other guys mentioned as standing out during the media interviews: wide receiver Eddie Lewis from Memphis, compared to Josh Vann. Same thing I said about him. Runs routes like Josh Vann. He's probably going to be your punt returner. A lot of good things were said about him. Wide receiver Peyton Mangrum, a walk-on. Spencer Rattler, that was the first guy he mentioned. Desmond Umeozulu was mentioned. Lenora Sellers was mentioned and has been mentioned glowingly by everybody. Definitely the fastest quarterback in the room, but has a big arm. Got to work on the accuracy some. But look, hopefully he's not going to have to play this year. I think after a year in the system, that dude's going to be tough to beat out. I'm just saying. And then also Nick Emanwari, the quote was, he's taken his game to a different level. Also mentioned young defensive tackle Jamal Weish. I believe that was TJ Sanders talking about him. And Desmond Umeozulu also mentioned by Tyreek Johnson. So that is your Nana's Porch news, notes, and headlines. Go ahead and jump in the chat box. And we will be back after this commercial message with Emily Adams from the Greenville News.
If you enjoy listening and watching the free Wednesday show, now live streaming on YouTube, and would love more Gamecock Pod daily, join our growing Gamecock family by becoming a monthly or annual subscriber. You'll be able to listen to the show every day of the week and listen to guests like J.C. Sherbert, Hale McGranahan, and John Whittle from thebigspur.com, Colin Taylor and Mike Yuva from Gamecock Central, Emily Adams from the Greenville News, Ben Portnoy, Michael Lanana, and Jeremiah Holloway from GoGamecocks.com, Michael W. Bratton, the host of That SEC podcast, and many, many more. As a VIP subscriber, you can join or listen to the weekly live Zoom call with up to 100 of your favorite Gamecocks and friends. After the show is an unrecorded overtime segment where the real scoop gets dropped and discussed. It's like going down to your local pub or sports bar and having a conversation with your Gamecock friends about last week's football game, men's and women's basketball games, and Gamecock baseball. And of course, there's always recruiting to discuss. In addition to the weekly Zoom call, VIP subscribers get the most popular podcast, The Morning After, which is released every Sunday morning during football season, and more VIP perks are in the works. Follow Keith on Twitter at KAllset, or follow the show on Twitter at Gamecock Pod. Go to the top of the homepage and follow the link. If all else fails, go to patreon.com/Gamecock Pod Daily. Join now and get up to 3 months free off an annual VIP subscription. You will love it, guaranteed. Now, back to Gamecock Pod Live.
And we welcome into the show good friend of the program, Emily Adams, who will fly out to Dallas later today. Emily, you look very calm for someone who probably stayed up all night packing and making sure you have everything you need for your trip. How are you?
Yeah, calm. Don't confuse calm for tired. I think that's more where we're at. But yeah, I'm excited to get down there, and we'll have the Naismith ceremony will be this afternoon, so we'll kick everything off with all that, and then tomorrow the real fun starts.
Well, we'll get back to that Naismith award in just a couple of minutes. So right off the top, obviously the Final Four is set, and ESPN and Women's Basketball America, or globally, really gets the matchup that they all wanted was South Carolina versus Iowa. Sunday night, I watched Iowa and Louisville, and I said, man, Caitlin Clark, she just won the National Player of the Year. 41 points on 19 field goal attempts, 8 of 14 from 3, 11 of 13 from the free throw line, 10 rebounds, and 12 assists in 39 minutes. But the one stat nobody mentions on that stat line, 9. Well, on the box score, it says 9. Maybe she did have 10 turnovers. But
yeah,
that was almost a quadruple double.
It sure was. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing I think that's so interesting about the way the National Player of the Year conversation has gone this year is that it's so much become, well, Leah doesn't have the numbers and Caitlin does. And if the numbers you're talking about are points, then sure. If the numbers you're talking about are defensive efficiency, then it's kind of going the other way around. I mean, you know, I was just looking at this actually and doing some prep for the Naismith ceremony later this afternoon. And Caitlin is the only finalist who has a defensive win share rate that ranks out of the top 100. She's 170th. The next lowest is Maddie Siegrist, who's in the 60s. So, I mean, it's just, you know, Caitlin is, you know, I think one of the most electric offensive players we've seen in women's basketball in a very long time. I don't think there's any argument about that. I think the question is whether that makes her the best player. And that's where I think I differ from a lot of people. I think Aaliyah is still the best player in women's basketball, and I don't think it's as close as people think it is. But, you know, if you're voting on the basis of who's having the best season, it's hard to argue against Caitlin at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Here's the thing, though. There's like a national media campaign. Like, I was following the game, I was watching the game, and I was on my Twitter timeline, and there were guys like Andy Staples and Bruce Feldman who never, ever tweet about women's basketball. And it was almost like they had an agenda, like all the hype about Caitlin Clark really doesn't reach the level of Caitlin Clark. I mean, she was phenomenal, but let's keep it real. That was not a vintage Louisville team. That was not the Louisville team that upset Baylor when Baylor was loaded in the Final Four. That was a very ploddingly unathletic Louisville team with Haley Van Lith, who was about the only player they could count on offensively. And so it was a showcase. I mean, 41 points. And she was really, I mean, the threes that she was hitting were from way downtown.
Her range is unlike anything I have ever seen. It's pretty wild. And I mean, it's not even just that she hits the shots from that deep. It's half the time she's on 1 foot off balance, midair, just kind of chucking them up, and she can't miss. So it's really, I mean, that's something I'm very excited to see in person. Just, I mean, that aspect of her game is so unique and so cool. So that's, I mean, just part of, I think, what makes her so exciting to watch.
I mean, I agree. And so let's throw out a couple of statistics here. So I think the NCAA has to like the format of their tournament on the women's side, having 2 sites instead of 4, because they just blew the numbers out of the water for the regional attendance.
Yeah.
Over 82,000 fans witnessed in their seats, live and in person, the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 games. That's over 8,000 more than the tournament record, which was in 2003. And the first time they've ever gone over 80,000 fans. And the tournament's only had more than 70,000 fans twice, 2003 and 2014. And so it's also going to be the first women's Final Four in 38 years. Let's see, I guess that'd be since I was 21, that will not have UConn, Stanford, or Tennessee as a participant. And I think that's also good for the women's game. It's growing. And Emily, don't you think that, are you with me that for the first time in probably history, the most intriguing matchup of a Final Four will be at the women's Final Four. It will not be at the men's Final Four, which has 3 teams nobody's ever heard of and UConn.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun. They're fun for very different reasons this year, I think, which is kind of what makes it so interesting. And I think why they'll draw sort of different and also both audiences. I mean, the men's Final Four is just like, who on earth is going to win this thing? Because somebody has to, and none of these teams make sense. So like that, from that aspect, I think the men's tournament's been really, really fun. Just, so many Cinderellas, so many sort of first time historic season type of situations. It was really cool. During Miami's game against LSU, they popped the Miami men's win up on the Jumbotron. And so, all the Miami faithful in the crowd went crazy over that. Katie Meyer had to yell at her players to get it back under control because they were all, watching and getting excited about it. So that, it's just like, I think that's what's fun about the men's tournament. But I mean, the women's tournament this year, to have, we'll have 2 superstars in Aaliyah Boston and Caitlin Clark go head to head in the Final Four. We've got Kim Mulkey taking LSU back to the Final Four in year 2, which I don't think anyone really expected to see coming into this year. We've got, Dawn Staley and Kenny Brooks are, could very well be the first 2 Black coaches to meet in a national championship. It's only the second time there have been 2 Black coaches in a Final Four. So, I mean, there's just, it's such, high profile superstar, like legendary storylines on the women's side. So they're going to be very, very different Final Fours. And I think that's what's fun about it.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt about it. So I know you were there on Friday. My eyes are still hurting from the outfit that Kim Mulkey had on. I just don't know. I mean, so obviously, like we said, there was an attendance record. So let's talk about the Greenville regionals and the Seattle regionals, and then we'll really hone in on South Carolina, kind of how each team got there. And so LSU, they beat Miami in what was just a brick fest.
Yeah.
Neither team broke 32% from the field. Angel Reese had 0 field goals in the first half. I mean, do we characterize her as a superstar because she's got the lashes? She's a walking double-double. And certainly there is that campaign. She was just 3 for 15, but she did have, I think, her 32nd double-double of the year. Alexis Morris led LSU. She had 21 points on 22 field goal attempts. And LSU shot 30%. Mind-boggling. Miami shot 31.6%. They did not make a single three-pointer. And really the reason they lost was they had 18 turnovers.
Yeah.
And they did not have as many field goal attempts as LSU. But if you were sitting there when Kim Mulkey came out on Friday with that outfit, what was just the reaction on Media Row? I can only imagine it was fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, we had seen it when they came into the arena a little bit earlier for practice, and the biggest debate was we were trying to figure out what the fringe was. It took a while to realize it was feathers mostly, but also some tulle. It was that was a good one, and now I think it's becoming a bit at this point just to see kind of how far they can take it. And I mean, I'm entertained. It was, and she was a little bit more docile for the Elite Eight outfit. That one was just
same pants,
very glittery. Yeah,
same pants though.
So that's I'm interested to see what we break out for the Final Four. But yeah, that game was it was no pleasure to watch. But I mean, I'm a big Angel Reese fan. I've been a big Angel Reese fan all year. I think, as much as I like Elizabeth Kitley, I think Angel Reese should have been the 4th Naismith finalist, frankly, just with the year that she's had. I think the way that she's performed through the tournament has sort of validated some of that non-conference schedule. It's taken away some of that. Well, her numbers are only inflated because they didn't play anybody, which they certainly were early in the year. But I think now we're at the point where, like, okay, she did that against Utah. She did that against Miami. Like, every round she has just been, consistent for them. So I feel really good about where they are right now. They've been really fun to watch in the tournament. So I think that game, the Virginia Tech LSU game is going to end up being more competitive, even though South Carolina, Iowa is the one that, the world is watching.
Well, no doubt. So up in Seattle, we talked about Louisville and Iowa, which, by the way, I have a problem with the NCAA. Like, to me, you should have played one side of the bracket on Sunday and the other side of the bracket on Monday, because
we're all saying it. Everyone agrees.
Iowa gets an extra day of preparation and an extra day of rest. And then the winner of South Carolina and Iowa, they get less rest because it will be the late game, because it will be the most talked about game. The media will be there. But certainly Dawn Staley knows how to manage her team to get to Sunday, which, by the way, I also have a problem with them moving the game out of prime time on Sunday night to 2:30 local time in Dallas because of Sunday night baseball, which will be a meaningless baseball game in 162 games. They could have put it on ESPN2, or they could have just had the women's game at 6 o'clock Eastern on ABC, and it wouldn't have really interrupted much of their prime time schedule. I know they think they're doing a service to the game by moving the game to Sunday, but moving it out of prime time to an afternoon game, to me, really does a disservice to the national championship.
Yeah, it was a weird choice to me just because the ratings have been so good. I mean, speaking of things that shatter records, like, that was all of the viewership across ESPN's platforms was up 75-80% throughout the weekend. I believe both South Carolina's Elite Eight game and UConn's Sweet 16 game were set new records for viewership during the tournament, flat out, like most viewed games ever. So yeah, I don't hate it personally, just because, the afternoon tip-offs make the day for the media a little bit easier and a little less long, especially after we get the 9 p.m. Eastern tip-off on Friday. But, I think it's a game that deserves to have that weekend primetime spot, and it's unfortunate that we're not going to get that.
All right, and so to me, Seattle 3 was the most surprising bracket.
Yeah.
Because I thought Ohio State, they are the weirdest team
Yeah.
I thought they were a fraud, quite frankly.
I mean, they tried to be one really hard in the middle of the season there.
Yes.
They were not trying to convince anybody of anything.
Yes. And so UConn, they had their players, right? Like
Yeah.
I said when I picked the bracket, I couldn't pick UConn simply because they're one injury away from being just a mediocre basketball team.
Yeah.
Because they've had so many players that have missed so many games throughout the season. If you knew they were going to have everybody, I would have picked them, but I didn't. But I just did not see Ohio State's full court press wreaking havoc on a very skilled UConn team. They just were overwhelmed, which goes back to my point about UConn and Gino, is he's become so wrapped up in this Princeton backdoor swing and move, shoot the ball from the perimeter, dribble, drive, backdoor cut offense. I think that's what they spend all their time on. They looked like they were unprepared for the press and had just several mind-boggling turnovers, and Ohio State really kicked UConn's ass. I mean, it was 73-61, but it was worse than that.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a really strange game. And I don't think a game that anyone saw coming. I mean, Ohio State has struggled against much lesser opponents than UConn this year. And I think, I mean, it's the thing with that press is that's how they got Tennessee too, or with that press. And I think, you know, the thing that makes Ohio State so weird is they are always going to play like that. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, they get blown out. And when it does, they pull off ridiculous upsets. So, I mean, they were a team that could kind of beat anybody, lose to anybody. I did not expect UConn to be the anybody that they beat, especially not with AZ back, and especially not the way that AZ had played the game before. I mean, she looked fantastic in the round of 32 and then just couldn't do anything in that Sweet 16 game.
So Virginia Tech, just like their coach, they quietly advanced. They beat Tennessee. Tennessee really couldn't get it going. The little Australian guard for Virginia Tech, she was phenomenal in that game, Amore. And, you know, then they beat Ohio State and advance. And so only two number one seeds took care of business, and that was South Carolina and Virginia Tech. And that's my pick to meet in the national championship game.
Yeah.
But let's talk about South Carolina's regional. So I didn't know anything about that game because I was umpiring baseball. And as soon as the second game is over, I get back to my car, turn it on because it was 88 degrees. And then last night it was 55 degrees.
Sounds like March.
Yeah. And so 25-15 at halftime. And then South Carolina scores as many points, and Virginia Tech, they scored the exact number of points in the third quarter that each team scored in the first half. But, you know, South Carolina, I thought they did a great job defensively on UCLA, and they just never really had a chance, quite frankly. And Charisma Osborne, I think she got 14 points, and I was kind of amazed she got that many.
Yeah.
I think that was a credit to her because that was just a South Carolina team, like we've said, that when they see a team, the same team, for a second time, it's usually worse. And it was really never much of a game, quite frankly.
Yeah, it was shocking to me. I mean, I think the thing that really happened in that game was UCLA just it didn't have that sort of element of surprise, I think, that it came out with the first time, in that, what put South Carolina so off balance that first time they played was the pace that UCLA was playing at early. I mean, they were just, exploiting that fast break, really getting, Osborne was just so shifty getting around people. Kiki Rice had 15 points in the first 3 quarters. And South Carolina took Rice out of the game. She, I think, finished with 3 points. I don't think she scored in the second half, possibly. She was just a complete non-factor, which was really surprising to me. And then, Osborne still led the team, but not nearly the performance she had the first time. I think South Carolina was just so prepared, and UCLA didn't have anything new, which again surprised me. I think Corey Close is an excellent coach, and so it surprised me that they didn't have anything else to kind of break out there. But in the same vein, when the South Carolina defense is playing like that, there is really only so much you can do. And Corey said as much in post game. They just weren't as good, and that's just what it came down to. So that game was not as exciting as I had hoped it would be, but it was a really, really large crowd. It was, I believe, the largest crowd we saw over the games that were played in Greenville, and it was very much a home crowd advantage for South Carolina. So that was kind of the first indicator that this is going to go well for them.
Yeah. So Monday night, South Carolina saw a team that they played the second game of the season. It was not the same team.
No.
Because Diamond Miller did not play.
Yeah.
And this is a team that had several transfers who were playing together for the first time. They got overwhelmed, 81-56. But, man, I am a Brenna Fries fan. I have been a huge Brenna Fries fan forever. I guess maybe she's got a little bit too much old school in her. Is why they have so many transfers out of her program. She's recruited some real superstars, and, one just finished at at Ole Miss and was a top 3 draft pick or top 5 pick. And Angel Reese now is at LSU. If Maryland has Angel Reese, they would have probably been a number 1 seed this year.
Think it's hard with Maryland just because something was clearly off about the dynamics of that team last year. And some of the Maryland girls threw some shade in the post-game press conference of that sort of, we're more of a we-focused team than a me-focused team this year. And that's all well and good, but at the end of the day, you got to keep your stars in the building. You got to keep Ashley Owusu. You got to keep Angel Reese if you want to be a national title contender. And I think, the problem Maryland had in their second game with South Carolina is the same problem they had in the first. Was, we had a very close game at halftime, again, even with Diamond Miller on the court. And then after halftime, South Carolina blew it up because Maryland got tired and they just ran out of gas, and you could see it on the court. They just did not have the stamina to run that super high pressure man defense they were running for 40 minutes. And that wasn't a surprise, but it's, if you have Angel Reese and Ashley Owusu and some of, Abby Myers is maybe coming off your bench, that's a very, very different game that you're looking at. So I think it'll be interesting to see what Brenda does this postseason. If they see that same level of turnover, I think that will say more about the program than it does about just sort of the individual issues that were happening last year. And, if she can have another successful year, because Abby Myers was incredible in the first half of that game. What a get out of the portal on that one. So, Brenda's used the portal and lost to the portal. So I think it'll be interesting to see kind of where that heads going into next year.
So you think about Abby Myers from Princeton and Sanchez at UConn.
Yeah,
she was at a smaller,
Senegal.
Lopez Senegal, my bad. She was from a smaller school than that, like an obscure D1.
Yeah, Fairfield, which is in Connecticut, actually.
Yeah.
Like very much a mid-major at best.
Yeah. I mean, I just thought those were terrific players. And so Brenda Freeze, her coaching, she just said, well, we play fast, we play 5 out. We talked about how that would be contrasting styles of play. I talked about how I thought it would be hard for South Carolina to have Cardoso and Boston on the court at the same time with Maryland playing 5 out. And we didn't see much of that in the first half because Maryland was just playing at a frenetic pace. I think they caught the Gamecocks off guard. South Carolina looked like they were back on their heels in the first quarter. And Maryland's up 21-15. South Carolina had 5 or 6 turnovers in the first quarter and shot 33% from the field. And they missed a ton of layups in this game. 21 of 43, 22. That's less than 50% from point blank range. And I think part of that, outside of Aaliyah Boston, I thought South Carolina really rushed their shots because of the pace of the game.
Yeah.
Only Aaliyah, she does not get sped up because of her greatness and because of just how many games she's played, how many big games she's been in. And she and Zia Cook really turned that game around for South Carolina in the second quarter.
Yeah, and Bree Beal as well had a season high in that game. I mean, just with shooting the lights out from 3, which, I mean, talk about a WNBA draft stock just on the rise. The more she hits those outside shots, the higher and higher she's going to end up on those draft boards. But yeah, I mean, I thought that Maryland game to me was sort of peak Aaliyah. That was just Aaliyah doing what she had 5 assists in that game, which is way above her average. She had 2 blocks, which is right at her average, 22 points, 10 rebounds, and she sat for pretty significant part of the fourth quarter after she hit that double-double, got the last rebound. I think Dawn wanted to let her put that one on the board, but I mean, I thought it was a very strong statement in response to what Iowa had done the night before. Whether that was actually on the minds or not, I think that it was a good sort of, hey, don't forget I'm here too. After, Caitlin Clark was the talk of the entire world 24 hours before.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of saw South Carolina win in a different way. They've been winning with defense, the number 1 field goal defense in the country, but Maryland, they shot 50% from the field and 50% from 3. South Carolina was 50% from 3 until Dawn emptied the bench. Maybe 6 for 13 because I think they had one at the end of the shot clock. And then Olivia.
A couple of Olivia lobs right there.
Yeah, a couple of those. But Cardoso was much better in the second half. I'll say this for Bree Beal. I thought she had her best offensive game of the year, but I thought it was maybe the worst defensive game of her career. She could not stay in front of Angel Reese. I thought Breezy Hall fared better, and that was still, Diamond Miller got hers. I mean, 24 points, 9 of 16. But the foul trouble, only 26 minutes, and I thought this was a horribly officiated game.
It was bad. Yeah, it was really bad.
And it was bad for both teams. I thought Maryland got the worst of it because the critical calls on Abby Myers were not fouls.
Yeah,
Her 4th and 5th fouls were not fouls.
Yeah, and I think that was the thing why, there was so much, especially like online frustration, was it was not that the calls were horribly lopsided towards South Carolina. Just watching it, I mean, I felt like the bad calls were affecting everybody. I mean, Bree Beal should have had 0 fouls, frankly, if we were calling it correctly. But the problem was that those two most critical ones were on Abby, and they were so close together. And she had been lighting it up for so much of the first half that it really did sort of change, I think, Maryland's momentum, especially when she had to come off the floor. And so it just nobody wants to win like that. Nobody wants to have to listen to that all day. You want to play with the best players on the floor. So it was just that game was frustrating to watch, just because it was so bizarrely officiated, and it wasn't even bad in a consistent way. It was, sometimes they were calling certain things and sometimes they weren't, and certain contact they were letting go and certain contact they weren't, and there was really no rhyme or reason to it. So yeah, it was a weird one, and the officiating in Greenville was not great for most of the weekend. Frankly, there were not many games I felt were well officiated.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I thought a couple of the fouls called on Camila Cardoso, that was all ball. And I thought South Carolina got mugged several times and there was no call. But like you said at the start, Maryland is not a deep team. They were not as athletic. They could not match the size of South Carolina. And so the fouls did pile up. 26 fouls for Maryland, 12 for South Carolina. It was some of those critical fouls, but let's keep it real. When South Carolina emptied the bench, they were up 19 points.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The game was well within hand when some of those fouls happened, but you do want to see Abby Myers on the floor, right? Like, you want to see the best players on the floor the entire game. And she's just a hell of a player. She's fun to watch. She can really shoot it. She can go off the dribble. She can pass it. I want to get your thoughts on this as well. Remember the Angel Reese flop on the baseline out of bounds? When Camilla just barely touched her. Yeah, and she pulled a Cameron Brink. She flopped, right? I thought that probably influenced the officials against Maryland on contact for the rest of that game.
I could see that. It was, I mean, that clip's been circulating, obviously, and just it gives me a chuckle every time. It just, and you can see even Diamond kind of gets up laughing at it. I mean, she knew, they both knew. She was just like, let's see how this goes. And hey, I respect it. I respect the effort. You try what you got to try against South Carolina, but yeah, I'm glad they didn't get away with that, because then we really would have had a mess of a game going on.
So I thought it was very fitting for South Carolina that the freshies really carried the team, right? Like Zia Cook, 18 points. She was really good until late in that game. I thought she got tired because she played so hard. She allowed South Carolina to have so many more possessions by leaping in the fray and tipping the ball back out. She got a steal. She was maybe more active on the boards than I've seen her all year. She had 8 rebounds, and she just tapped several balls back out. But she was just really good. And Aaliyah, 22 points on 10 or 14 from the field, 10 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 block shots, and plus 21 in 33 minutes. I thought that's just what she does when teams play her one-on-one. And Bree Beal, if she would have made free throws, she would have had 20 points.
Yeah.
5 of 10, 2 of 3 from downtown, 7 rebounds, 6 assists, 3 steals, plus 23. That led the team. Just 4 for 9 from the free throw line. And that was it. I thought Raven Johnson, I thought the pace really caught Kira Fletcher off guard. Like, I did not think she was up for that. Raven, that played into her style, and I really thought Raven, Breezy Hall, and in the second half, Cardoso really allowed South Carolina to expand the lead because they just had more quality depth than Maryland.
Yeah, I mean, Breezy Hall had a great weekend. I think Breezy Hall is sort of the heir apparent to Bree Beal.
No
I
doubt.
really like the way she defends. I think there's a lot of sort of similarities in their game. I mean, she already has that outside shot down. She was hitting them all weekend whenever they sort of needed that clutch three. But yeah, I mean, I think with Fletcher, the thing that was interesting was she really had a hard time in that first half. I think that pace caught her off guard. But you also started to see Raven struggle with that a little bit, and Raven struggled the first time against Maryland too because Raven's play is inherently so chaotic that when another team is sort of also forcing that chaos, it can compound itself and just create a mess. So I thought, the way that Staley was kind of rotating the two of them through ended up working out really well for them. And I thought Fletch seemed a lot more settled in the second half, definitely got more comfortable with it as time went on. And she was really strong in that first Maryland game as well. So I think it was one of those things where it took her a half to catch up to it. But once she did, she had sort of found her footing a little more. And you saw that with so much of the team, I think, in that second half where, they went into halftime, they made the adjustments, they came back out and they, had a game plan and executed it. And I think, that is what has made them so hard to beat all year is you can beat them for a half. You can't beat them for 2.
No doubt. So now it's the Hawkeyes and the Gamecocks. It's Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston. And so looking at Iowa, kind of similar to Maryland.
Worse defensively. I will be pounding this drum until the cows go home. Iowa is one of the worst defensive teams in the country, and that is not an exaggeration. They are in the bottom 50 out of 350. The best defensive team they've played this year were Georgia and UConn. Both are in the top 50 scoring defenses, and both held UConn held Caitlin to 25 points. Georgia held her to 22. She does not excel against elite defenses the way that she does against, much of the Big Ten, which is not a highly defensive conference. And I think South Carolina, which has overtaken Norfolk State and Duke as the number 1 scoring defense, is going to be an extremely rude awakening for them. I do not think Iowa is prepared to handle what South Carolina does at all. I don't think they've seen it, and I don't think they have the roster to match up with it, frankly. They have Caitlin, and I'm sure Caitlin will have 30 points, and the rest of the roster will not.
So I'm glad you mentioned that Georgia game because I had that in my notes to discuss because, quite frankly, I thought Georgia was probably should have won that game. They could have won that game. Not only did they miss a couple of bunnies, but just like in the Maryland, South Carolina game, they had some calls that went against them that were not that good. And so I think because of the atmosphere, I've always said as an old coach, when you go, and now these teams, they do play in bigger arenas, but generally when you go to a Final Four and you're in an arena that's an NBA arena or larger, like over 20,000 people, generally 3-point shooting does not win there. It's inside, 2-point baskets, defense, and rebounding. And those are all South Carolina strong suits. Iowa has not seen anything like they're going to see.
No.
I'm interested to see how they try to play. Will they try to play like Maryland? Will they try to slow the game down with some phantom three-quarter court pressure, whether it's 1-2-1-1, a diamond press, or a 2-2-1, or even a 1-3-1? Then do they sag? How do they play? I mean, Monica Cesano and McKenna Warnock are not prepared for what they're going to see with Aaliyah Boston and Camila Cardoso and
that's no discredit.
Everybody else.
Monica's been incredible this year. Monica is, I think, a very large part of why they are in this Final Four. But I mean, South Carolina is a different animal than, playing Mackenzie Holmes and playing Diamond Miller. It's they do not have the kind of post players that can go toe to toe with Camilla and with Aaliyah. And I mean, on that 3-point shooting, I mean, again, against really elite defenses, Caitlin has not shot well from 3, and that's where so many of her points come from. I mean, in that UConn game earlier in the year, she was 2 of 11 from 3, which is not great and not typical for her. And then against Georgia, it was better. She was 4 of 10, but that's, still kind of below her usual what she's hitting from that range. So I think it's a really, really bad matchup for Iowa. I think this is sort of their worst case scenario is having to play South Carolina at this point. And it's hard for me to see a scenario where South Carolina loses this game, even if Caitlin puts up 50, because I just don't think they have the depth to, compete with South Carolina, considering South Carolina averages like 3 points less a game than them in scoring offense. I mean, people forget South Carolina is a high scoring team against teams that can't defend, and Iowa is a team that cannot defend. So I really have a hard time envisioning a situation where South Carolina does not win this game pretty comfortably.
So here are the X factors for me. 1, how is the game officiated? And foul trouble, which you can never account for. And then South Carolina's got to hit more layups. There is no excuse not to make at least 66% of your layups, not 48% or 50%. Or even 55. That is a high percentage shot, the highest percentage shot. And the missed free throws. At one point, South Carolina was 50% free throws. They were 6 for 12. They end up hitting their last 4 to go 10 for 16. They really didn't get to the line as much as they did earlier in the tournament.
Yeah.
But then for Iowa, like Warnock, she shot 44% from 3 in Big Ten play. Clark 40%. For the season, Clark 39%, Warnock 39%, Kate Martin 40%, Gabby Marshall almost 38%, and then off the bench, not as many minutes. Taylor McCabe, almost 42%. But South Carolina's played UConn. Now they played UCLA. They played Maryland. South Carolina is not going to let you 3 them. Dawn Staley says we are going to make them 2 us. We're not going to let them 3 us. And I have to think that is the plan. And I do think Caitlin will get hers.
Because I mean, she always does. She will have at least. I mean, I'm sure she'll have a double-double. At least, you know, I'm sure she'll have 25 points at least. I don't think it's good enough. It's just not. Iowa is not a good enough team, and South Carolina is a good enough team, and that's very much going to be the difference. You know, I think the other thing is that Iowa does what Iowa does every time, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and if it works, it works. You know, you saw that in that blowout loss they had to Maryland. If the things that normally work for them aren't working, they don't have another gear. They don't have another option. They don't have someone else they can turn to. It just collapses. And, you know, if there's one thing Dawn Staley's going to do, it's game plan your offense. And I think, you know, Iowa's very predictable. And that's, you know, as good as it gets for South Carolina's defense in terms of coming into a matchup.
I do think there'll be an adjustment, kind of like against Maryland, because they haven't seen them. It's hard to replicate what they do in practice. But for me, who starts on Caitlin Clark and who starts on McKenna Warnock? Because those are their best 2 players.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll see a lot of Zaya on Caitlin Clark, honestly. You know, just because I think Zaya has a little bit, you know, Bree is so technical, so disciplined, and Zaya has a little bit more of that sort of scrappiness in her. And I think that's sort of almost more of what you need to play against Caitlin. You need to kind of rough her around a little bit, for lack of a better phrase. And so I think we'll see a lot of Zaya. I'm sure Bree will rotate onto her, but I would not be surprised to see Bree start on Warnock and Zaya start on Clark. And then obviously Monica will kind of be Aaliyah's charge, I'm sure, for most of the game. Yeah,
I was going to say the same. And then I think we'll continue to see more Breezy Hall. I think you could see LA burn some fouls, guarding Caitlin Clark. I think they can rotate a number of different type of players. Like you may start with Zaya, then it could be Bree Beal, it could be Breezy Hall, it could be LA. Yeah. So the last time this thing was played in Dallas, it was 2017. South Carolina played Stanford. UConn played an upstart SEC team making their first Final Four appearance with their coach. In Mississippi State, they were not a 1 seed. And they hit the itty bitty. Morgan Williams hit the shot, heard around the world. And you had an all SEC final.
Yeah.
And South Carolina won. And so now you're back in Dallas. This time you're the prohibitive favorite. I don't think you were in 2017. It was UConn, because that's when their 112 or 116 game win streak got broken. Are we looking at another all SEC final in Dallas? And just like with Mississippi State, LSU is much closer to Dallas than Columbia, South Carolina. I do think there will be a ton of Gamecocks there.
Oh, I'm sure.
My tickets came through while we were recording this. And so what do you think about that other game? I just think Elizabeth Kitley, she's 6'5", but I just don't think she wants any part of Aaliyah Boston, and I don't know that Virginia Tech's tough enough to go through LSU.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's interesting because they're very different. I think Virginia Tech in some ways is a bad matchup for LSU because they're very technical. They're very, classic basketball, of what you think of when you think of a women's basketball team. I think Kitley's obviously had an incredible year. Georgia Amore has, hit her stride in the tournament. She just cannot miss. And in that, she was incredible to watch in that Tennessee game. And so I think in some ways they're a bad matchup for LSU, just in that LSU is not super technical, super, get set and play around. LSU is fast and loose and that sort of more chaotic energy. So that's why I really think that game could go either way, because if LSU gets on a run, I think it's going to be hard for Virginia Tech to get it back under control. But I think Virginia Tech might be able to keep it under control from the beginning. And I think that the first quarter, first half are really going to kind of dictate how the game is going to go. But I'm really excited for that game. I think that game is a much better basketball game than South Carolina Iowa is. I think it's going to be much more competitive. I expect it to be close. LSU just feels very confident right now. And I think that's the best thing they have on their side, is that they have nothing to lose. They've exceeded every expectation they had. And so they're just kind of here for a good time at this point. And I think in March, that is the mindset and the mental space that you want to be in, because I think the more pressure there is, the more likely you are to crack. We haven't seen Virginia Tech do that yet. Obviously, I think Kenny Brooks has done, just an incredible job of kind of keeping them on the straight and narrow. But that's going to be a fun one for sure.
I agree. To me, that one could go either way, but I did watch Virginia Tech play. I think they probably have more players than LSU. I don't know if they're as athletic as LSU. Kitley is a little too much finesse for my liking with her size. She should really be dominant. And if it's Virginia Tech, South Carolina, I'm just throwing it into Aaliyah every time, because I think she will beat her into submission along with Cardoso. Yeah. So I've said it. You said it in our private conversations. I think Friday night, Iowa, South Carolina, that, barring an injury or something wacky, that's probably the national championship game.
Yeah. And I felt that way, frankly, about, when we were watching LSU Utah. It was kind of the same situation where it was, okay, whoever wins this is going to the Final Four. Because at that point, Miami had already beaten Villanova, and, the Miami magic was going to run out at some point. And it did, unfortunately, but they tried to keep it in there. But yeah, I think, again, I feel very, very comfortable with South Carolina against Iowa. No part of me is genuinely concerned that they might lose that game, but I think those right now are the two teams that are playing the best. And I really like South Carolina's matchup against either LSU or Virginia Tech in a national championship. So I think this is sort of the ideal path at this point for them, is to have Iowa in the Final Four and then to have those two on the other side of the bracket, because, I don't think, again, obviously, UConn obviously was beatable, but I think UConn would have been a tougher matchup for them in the Final Four. I think Indiana would have been a tougher matchup for them in the championship. And I think, if Stanford had gotten through the Final Four, they would have been a tougher matchup. So I think right now South Carolina is in a very, very good position to do the repeat.
I agree. Well, Emily, thank you so much for joining the show today before you fly out to Dallas. Safe travels. I'll hit you up when I get up there on Friday. Hopefully I'll get to at least give you a wave. And it will be an interesting weekend. The Gamecocks are 2 wins away from a season of perfection and becoming one of 5 programs to go back-to-back national champions. and to have a season of perfection. So safe travels. Have a great experience. It should be a great experience at the Final Four, and we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Keith. Pleasure as always.
All right, we'll be right back after this message.
If you enjoy listening and watching the Free Wednesday show, now live streaming on YouTube, and would love more Gamecock Pod daily, join our growing Gamecock family by becoming a monthly or annual subscriber. You'll be able to listen to the show every day of the week and listen to guests like J.C. Sherbert, Hale McGranahan, and John Whittle from thebigspur.com, Colin Taylor and Mike Yuva from Gamecock Central, Emily Adams from the Greenville News, Ben Portnoy, Michael Lanana, and Jeremiah Holloway from GoGamecocks.com, Michael W. Bratton, the host of That SEC podcast, and many, many more. As a VIP subscriber, you can join or listen to the weekly live Zoom call with up to 100 of your favorite Gamecocks and friends. After the show is an unrecorded overtime segment where the real scoop gets dropped and discussed. It's like going down to your local pub or sports bar and having a conversation with your Gamecock friends about last week's football game, men's and women's basketball games, and Gamecock baseball. And of course, there's always recruiting to discuss. In addition to the weekly Zoom call, VIP subscribers get the most popular podcast, The Morning After, which is released every Sunday morning during football season, and more VIP perks are in the works. Follow Keith on Twitter at KAllset, or follow the show on Twitter at Gamecock Pod. Go to the top of the homepage and follow the link. If all else fails, go to patreon.com/Gamecock Pod Daily. Join now and get up to 3 months free off an annual VIP subscription. You will love it, guaranteed. Now, back to Gamecock Pod Live.
All right, great stuff with Emily Adams, and I can't wait for the Garnet and Black Town Hall tonight at 7 o'clock Eastern. That is our weekly VIP Zoom call. We call it the Garnet and Black Town Hall. And it's like going down to your neighborhood pub and hanging out with your favorite Gamecock buddies and talking about the Gamecocks. And I'm sure there'll be a lot to talk about. So tomorrow on the show, John Whittle will join the conversation. He will talk about Gamecock baseball, which evidently the weekend rotation, Mississippi State comes into town tomorrow, and that rotation will not include Will Sanders. Looks like it will be Eli Jones, Noah Hall, and Jack Mahoney. So we'll talk to him about that. We'll talk to him about the addition of Talon Cooper and who else could be jumping on from the transfer portal with Lamont Paris as he remakes his roster for season 2. We'll also have a special Final Four edition with Sumter and Bryce from the Gamecock Basketball Only podcast. And then we'll have Colin Taylor on Friday to talk football, hoops, and baseball. All right. Some more notes on the McDonald's game. Malaysia Fulwiley, she finished with 17 points, but in the second quarter, she went on a personal 11-0 run in less than 2 minutes and was just dazzling in that game. Tessa Johnson did not score, but she had 51 points in a game this year. And I would not underestimate her. As far as the freshies and them potentially taking advantage of the COVID year, Bree Beal has ruled it out. She said, I am not a fan of school. And she says, I'm going in the draft. Letitia Amihir said she has not made a decision. Zaya Cook has not made a decision. They both said they would take their 48 hours. And then Aaliyah Boston said she's not even been thinking about it. And she will make her announcement after the NCAA tournament. And then Camila Cardoso, who could go in the WNBA draft, has said she's not even thought about entering the draft. She's planning on coming back. So I will say, out of the 4 freshies, I think Boston, because she is the consensus number 1 pick. Don't you have to go? I mean, you're going to get commercials. You're going to get a lot of endorsements. You come back another year and risk injury, then maybe you're not the number 1 pick. That's my thinking for why she won't come back. I'm not going to completely rule it out, but I think Beal and Boston are definitely going to the draft. Zia Cook is not currently projected as a first-round pick, so I do think she could come back. And I think of me here, she could be your starting small forward next year and play 30 minutes a game and play her way into a top 3 or 4 pick. I just think her ceiling has always been so high. I do think she could benefit, but she may not risk. She's had too many injuries. She may elect to move on. Who knows on that? So, I mean, we'll just have to see how it goes with that. Couple of very interesting quotes from Alex Jones' story on Spencer Rattler today on the Big Spur. Rattler says Dowell Loggins was a big part in his decision. Quote, I feel like we left some things on the table throughout the season that myself and Juice wanted to reach and achieve. We could have both taken that next step and been okay. But I think coming back was the right decision. Coach Dowell is here now. He has a lot of experience in the league. Being with him for a whole year will be great. Love this team, love this program. I want to keep achieving more with my guys. He says Loggins wants him to be like a point guard and just run the show. He just says, go play ball. Go be you. That's why I love being coached by him. Let me be a point guard and run the show. I love that. I love the trust and belief from him to let me go out there and lead these guys. Everybody has been loving the new offense. It's been really smooth. Rattler says through the first 7 practices, it's been amazing. D'Lo is the same guy in the meeting room as he is on the practice field, which is good to see. He is true to who he is. He coaches well. He coaches you up. He doesn't lose his mind. I think that's probably a shot over the bow of the former guy there. He says Loggins is very particular, very detailed with what he wants, and he's making all of us better. One thing that stands out to Rattler about Loggins is how open he is to everyone's input on how they can improve the offense. In return, Rattler says everybody is becoming more and more comfortable in the system. Quote, he's been very open with me about what we want to do. I'm on the same page with him. Whenever I say something, he will listen. Whenever he says something, I listen. We work together. It's a partnership. He said he's very open to input, and the quarterbacks, we have a lot of great things that all of us are comfortable with. So Rattler says he feels they're very close as a team. That's something Shane Beamer always preaches. We want to be the closest and most connected team in the country. And we're a lot more comfortable with everything now. Love the new offense with what Coach Dowell is doing, and just really been enjoying it. So good stuff there from Spencer Rattler, and a FOS, a friend of Spencer and former teammate at Oklahoma, wide receiver Trajan Bridges, 6'1", 180, who had to leave Oklahoma. He got into some trouble out there. He's turning over a new leaf, looking for a second chance. I talked about him in that late signing period. And I said if South Carolina didn't get the guys out of the transfer portal that they wanted, this could be a guy to follow. He's on campus right now for a visit. This past season, 59 receptions, 762 yards, and 8 touchdowns at East Los Angeles Community College. I think Bridges would have 2 years of eligibility, and he is a high 4-star guy out of high school. He is a stud. And so I really wouldn't be surprised if this ends up working out. Obviously, if you're South Carolina, you've got to do your due diligence. But if he's on an official visit, I think this is something that definitely bears watching. All right, so a great show today. Thanks to Emily Adams. Thanks to Nana's Porch and my good friend Chris Payne for sponsoring the news, notes, and headlines and the chat box. Got to get more guys in the chat box. So until tomorrow on Gamecock Pod Daily, when I have John Whittle, this has been Gamecock Pod Live for March the 29th. God bless, go Gamecocks, and I hope to see a bunch of you in Dallas. I'm out of here. Have a great rest of the week. Become a patron. Get more of this podcast every single day. It's not too late to sign up now and get in for the Garnet and Black Town Hall tonight. Until next time, this is Keith Alsep saying God bless and go Gamecocks. I am out of here.